Alright, so Arena is my favorite magic novel of all time, if that isn't obvious, seeing as I narrated the entire book for fun and uploaded it to this very channel. So it's a little passion project, and in part due to boredom, I decided to write down every instance of a spell being cast by Garth in Arena. As a heads up, there's a number of times in Arena where Garth uses mana to cause an effect to happen around him that doesn't directly translate one-to-one to a spell in print at the time of the novel's writing. In those instances, I've done one of two things. Either I found a spell from 94 that fits the vibe, or failing that, I found a spell from more recent sets that would probably work. This is going to be chapter by chapter, and there are 16 to get through, so let's go. Oh, and spoilers ahead. Listen to the book if you haven't already. It's on my channel in its entirety. So in chapter 1, Garth throws around a couple of spells. He throws a Circle of Protection, most likely red as it stops a flame-based attack. He then throws a cold-themed counterspell, which from 94 is either like Blue Elemental Blast or Counterspell, and just themed cold. If we want to look at something not from 94, Flash Freeze is a fantastic option. He then throws a Drudge Skeleton onto the field and gives it Flight via the spell Flight. When his opponent casts the Flames That Never Die, he whips out a Reflecting Mirror, which is an artifact from the dark, and uses that to send the damage right back. When he wins, he pulls a copy of Fireball out of his opponent's spell satchel and walks off with it. Chapter 2, he lets loose hornets as big as a thumb. Well, there's no hornets in any card from 94. The closest thing is killer bees. He then lights these bees on fire to burn a dude as a distraction. The closest spell in print that I could find is Collateral Damage from like Khan's Block, which is most certainly not printed in 94. Otherwise, to achieve the thematic effect of burning bees, that fireball he just picked up with a little bit of mana thrown into it would probably suffice. He also casts Power Sink based on how it's described, and at the end of that fight he wins Earthbind. In chapter 3, he meets a Banalish woman who is a hero, and Banalish Hero is a spell from 94, but he doesn't cast her, so we're just not gonna count that as being part of his deck. In chapter 4, he uses a, quote, wall of protection against a demonic whale, most likely Circle Protection Black. He lets loose 2 pairs of grizzly bears, so he has at least 2 copies of grizzly bears in his deck. He uses a nondescript healing spell to wash away fear, which, seeing as it's a quick healing spell, I'm assuming it's a healing salve? Salve? However you say it. He also casts Giant Spider, and in this rendition it spits acid. Yay! Towards the end of the chapter, he casts a spell to become shadowy and opaque. There were 2 spells in 94 that seemed to have this general effect, those being invisibility or camouflage, and with how it's described, I think camouflage is a better fit, so let's go ahead and give that to him. Chapter 5, it focuses on Great House drama. No spells are cast. Chapter 6, he once again uses Circle Protection Red, and he lets loose with a fireball, hitting 5 men, flash frying them all at once. Technically like a war crime, isn't it? Anyway, after loosing fireball, he heals Hammond in a mere instant, which probably just healing salve again. He makes his dagger glow. It's not really a card that makes equipment brighter, but in 94 there was the spell Holy Light, which I mean technically, give him a copy of Holy Light and assume that's what he cast there, just using a real creative process for it. He looked at a man and hurt him. I'm just going to attribute that to Psionic Blast, as he casts Psionic Blast later in the story and it's called by name, so he's probably just using that. He also uses Circle Protection, probably blue, due to the spells he's stopping. and he casts a war mammoth in the middle of this like sand arena, right? It is described as a mammoth in the novel. There's a mammoth in 94, it is war mammoth. Now, in a section of chapter 6, he's dueling Verena, and she sends rats at him, like just hordes of rats. He does not summon his own horde of rats to send back, right? The text explains that they're laying spell upon spell to control the rats, which tells me that he's using control magic, the spell printed in 1994, and not casting his own rat spell to contest the rat. It's not how that works. I'm certain he's casting control magic, a blue spell, which lines up perfectly with his blue spell vibe. Chapter 7 rolls around and he casts Circle of Protection Red while he's getting jumped by a ring of fighters and their accompanied crossbowmen, conjures the mammoth again. New spell this time, he casts a Wall of Fire, fairly effective against getting shot with crossbow bolts. He casts Llanowar Elves by name, and then proceeds to use them as chump blockers. He casts what I can tell is telekinesis, printed in Legends, to push a giant off balance with magic as the giant attempts to attack him. He tries to burst open a door with mana. There's not really a spell that mentions or has the theme of like opening doors. Closest thing I could find is Glyph of Destruction, which destroys a wall after making it more powerful. It's the closest thing I could find. We'll just give him Glyph of Destruction and go from there. While attacked by enemy fighters, he tries to conjure another Circle of Protection Blue, as it's described that he's being attacked by mental assaults. But he gets shot with crossbow bolts. That fails. That's fun to know. He then proceeds to throw his satchel to Verena, the gal he fought in the arena in the like sand pit earlier, the one who bested him with psionic bolts and rats. Chapter 8, there's no spells cast by Garth as he doesn't have his satchel and he's occupied being tortured. So that's fun. Chapter 9, there's a prison break and he gets his satchel again, but he doesn't cast anything. Chapter 10, festival begins and plot happens, but again, he doesn't cast anything. Chapter 11, we get into the festival proper. The story makes a note of mentioning that he's hungover as hell, and round 1 is against Zeryl's lieutenant, a captain from Tantium. He casts a number of spells by name, and we'll get into those, as well as things that I'm making assumptions for. First he casts Fog. He then casts White Knight, a plague of hornets to kill the rats attacking him. We're just going to work under the same assumption that it's killer bees again. He then casts a Circle of Protection and another. We're going to assume black and red, given that the opponent is throwing undead and fire-based spells at him. A stand of trees encircled him, which I'm going to attribute to Wall of Wood. And then he casts Wall of Wood again, which means he has at least 2 copies in his deck. He brings a tree to life. That's going to be either Ironroot Treefolk or Argothian Treefolk, but with how generic it is and how it doesn't mention artifacts in this, I'm going to assume it's the Ironroot Treefolk. He casts Tiny Fairies to harass his opponent. The closest approximation is going to be Scrib Sprites. Given the context of the fights, it's easier to assume that he's casting just a cheap chump blocker. He then conjures one of his 2 bears. Hooray for Grizzly Bears. Fantastic card. He uses a Circle of Protection again, probably the one he already had on the field. He then probes his opponent's mind, which, like, for this era, there isn't really a lot of spells that let you look at your opponent's hand that I could find. I mean, other than, like, Glasses of Urza, but he doesn't use an artifact. He just casts the spell and looks into his opponent's mind. Telepathy was printed in 7th edition. But I mean, we could also go with like Inquisition, which would normally damage the opponent, but his opponent is casting nothing but black and red spells, so Inquisition isn't going to damage anything. Garth throws fairies at his opponent again, which we're just going to call Scrib Sprites number 2. He uses a river of ice from the heavens to stop an attack, and there's nothing of the era that matches that. But Winter's Chill from Ice Age is a good fit. He encases himself in holy armor, a spell at a time, uses Wall of Wood for the 3rd time this fight. He then, quote, vaporizes a handful of small, cheap creatures in seconds. It's probably sorcery speed, though, like given the context that the demon just attacked and was looking to feed after Garth pops the small creatures, and Lord of the Pit only feeds on the controller's upkeep, so his opponent attacked. The attack was warded off, and Garth destroyed a bunch of the creatures his opponent had on the field to feed his Lord of the Pit. Let's be honest, it's Fireball. It's described as like multiple blasts, I believe, but Fireball can target multiple things. So he just threw a bunch of mana into Fireball and blew up his opponent's board and let his opponent die to his own Lord of the Pit trigger. He then claims the entire satchel of his opponent. He gets a Lord of the Pit, Scathe Zombies, Frozen Shade, Dwarven Warriors, more fire magic. It's ambiguous. Plague Rats, a mana-destroying lash that his opponent used. I'm just discounting that entirely. There's not really much in the base set that deals with mana destruction in a lash-type sense. Though he does get a copy of Stone Rains, Ironclaw Orcs, Goblins, which I'm going to attribute to just being a copy of Mon's Goblin Raiders, and then Demonic Entities, which I'm going to forgo entirely as the only demonic entities in Magic at this time. It's like Lord of the Pit and Demonic Hordes. I think there's like a couple others, but nothing like small and cheap akin to what his opponent used. So we're gonna chalk that up to nothing right now. If we're going with something from the future, it would probably be like some of the imps from later sets. Chapter 12 rolls around and we go into round 2, baby, and he's fighting against a woman from Kessa, one of the 4 great houses. Though this is an anti-match, not a death match, he wins using the mammoth and turns down her spells, so nothing new there. Round 3, he wins in a literal sentence and claims another fireball from his opponent. Round 4 is against a man named Ullen, and that boils down to a knife fight. The only spell he casts is healing, so we're just going to assume healing salve. Round 5 is against Naru. Naru being a notable side character who becomes an ally after this, a little bit before this. Becomes an ally nonetheless. He casts a Wall of Trees, which we're going to attribute to Wall of Woods, and he also casts a Wall of Brambles. New spell, Wall of Brambles. He casts Wolves. Given how Garth leans toward green and blue spells, we're going to call these Timberwolves and not Tundra Wolves. You know, he gets another rare in his deck. Yay! Doesn't have First Strike, but has Banding. It's just as good. He summons another Treefolk, which we're going to call Ironroot Treefolk again. He weakens Naru's mana, which we're just going to attribute to mana short and move on. He casts Llanowar Elves again. And then he casts Winged Creatures. These aren't described super well. This could be, frankly, anything from Mesa Pegasus to Fire Drake to Azure Drake. It could even be Thunder Spirit. Because it's not really described, we're just going to go with Azure Drake, because it's neat, and in one of Garth's most used colors. So we're just going to give him the 4-drop Drake and call it good. He uses Circle of Protection green and red. We can tell what colors of Circle of Protection he's using based on the spells his opponent's using. He brings forth Walls of Trees repeatedly, which either he's regenerating the Wall of Brambles. We've already considered Wall of Trees to be Wall of Wood, so we're going to assume this is one of his many copies of Wall of Wood. He then casts Crawl Worm. He also casts Giant Growth. We can assume it's Giant Growth as he doubles the size of his Crawl Worm, and this is a spell of the era that fits that thematically. He wins a copy of Juggernaut, which Naru describes as his strongest spell. Cool, you know, not everyone can have a Crawl Worm. You know, it's a rare, and a Juggernaut's uncommon of the time, so, you know, maybe Naru's playing on a budget. You know, Naru's got the cards he could pick up from the local shop. It's fine. The next spell Garth casts is called Terror, but it doesn't kill the guards that he casts it on, so it isn't terror by effect. It's more like he enchants himself with fear, because the guards run away, they don't die. So we're going to say he has access to fear and not terror, despite it being named Terror. Chapter 13, Hammond. snatches Garth's satchel and uses a spell to hold someone in place. Honestly, this is probably just a super clever use of Garth's copy of telekinesis, considering how smart Hammond is. I mean, he's an old man that's lived as a pickpocket and made it through untold horrors. By the time round 6 of Festival comes around, Garth has freed himself from Hammond's use of telekinesis and is back in the arena, and he uses Crawlworm, and that's the only spell that's really mentioned in round 6. Round 7 is against someone named Gilganarin of Inkara. Garth leads by summoning a wall. We're going to call it Wall of Stone. My notes just have quote-unquote a wall, and Wall of Stone is the closest thing to a wall we have access to. He drained his opponent's land of mana, which we're going to call Mana Short, like he used earlier. He conjures forth creatures that use little mana, and he's thrown around plenty already. Either Scrib Sprites, or the Bears, or it could even be Ironclaw Orcs that he stole off of his opponent from earlier. There's plenty. There's plenty of creatures using little mana to hold off an opponent's attack. He then calls forth Berserkers, which of the time, the only Berserkers I could find were Arethi Berserker. Though I'd probably pick Berserkers of Bloodridge if I was going to choose something from a more recent set. Round 8 is against Verena, and Garth leads with Armageddon by name. So it's draw land, pass, draw land, pass, draw land, pass. Armageddon. Which, sure, King, pop off, it's fine. He then uses a Disrupting Scepter, and he follows that up with a rare artifact to control more power than normal. In 1994, there were so many cards that let you use more mana than you had at your fingertips. It could be Sol Ring, it could be Basalt Monolith, it could be any of the Moxen, it could be Black Lotus. We're gonna call it Sol Ring. He then reads her thoughts, which we've already covered, the variety of things that could read someone's thoughts. We're gonna go with Inquisition. She doesn't have any weight spells to hand. Lucky her, yay. He melts a Wall of Swords, probably just Fireball. He then uses a Flood of Ocean to counter a red spell, which is probably just Blue Elemental Blast. But Tidal Control is funny, and also of the time frame the book was written in, so maybe, but it's probably just Blue Elemental Blast. He then conjures Great Beasts of the Deep, which, for the time, Leviathan is inarguably the greatest sea beast of its day, though Denizen of the Deep would also work, but that didn't come out until Portal's Second Age. And again in Starter 99. Shout out Starter 99. He then uses Flying Creatures, which again, let's just assume it's the Azure Drake we've already given him, because it's not well described and we already had quote-unquote Flying Creatures before. He then uses his own Wall of Swords, new spell, yay, and he conjures forth a Gorgon. Well, wouldn't you know, in Legends, Infernal Medusa was printed. So we're gonna give him Infernal Medusa. Yay! He uses Circle's Protection, and he uses healing spells. We've already covered those. He reverses the damage from a Psionic Blast, which, redirect, maybe? That was in M11. We're just gonna say he has redirect and move on. He again casts Wall of Brambles. He again casts his Tree Folk. He then casts Ice Storm, a weird spell from the early days of Magic. It's a green stone rain, and that's it. He then casts a giant of some kind. Hill or stone, doesn't really matter. We're just going to give him a hill giant because it's lower rarity, and this was written in 1994. We're just going to assume that he doesn't have all the rares or higher that he wants, because getting cards back in the day was actually kind of a pain. So he sprites again. Yay, Scrib Sprites. He then steals all of Verena's power and casts Juggernaut, so we're just going to give him a copy of Drain Power and move on. He then throws a number of Psionic Blasts back to back, so we're going to say he has, 3 copies? Let's give him 3 copies and move on. Chapter 14 is a lot of talking and a little bit of planeswalking, so not really any spells there. Then we hit Chapter 15, which... Chapter 15 is the last big fight in the novel. He casts his Circle of Protection, casts spells to double his strength and double it again. Which, like, Dark Writ, Mana Flare, High Tide, it really depends on the board state, but, like, considering it's early in the fight, let's just give him 2 copies of Dark Writ and assume that Garth's using it as he's in what he thinks to be his final fight. So he's going to fight to win, and he doesn't really care about the optics of using black spells at this point. He's never really cared about the optics, but they haven't been a favorite of his, right? So let's just give him 2 copies of Dark Writ in hand and call it good. He then, again, looks at his opponent's spells or mind. It's a little vague, given that the Planeswalker he's fighting is a shadow entity right now. So, I misspoke earlier. Telepathy released in Urza's Saga, but it fits the description the best. Of the cards of the time, Natural Selection, Visions, Urza's Glasses, though again that's an artifact and Garth clearly just casts a spell instead of using an item. Odds are it's Inquisition from earlier, but let's give him a copy of Natural Selection and call it good. He then casts Living Wall, and then there's a cluster. There's a exchange of spells, and boy howdy, let me tell you, it certainly is an exchange of spells. So, as best I can parse what happens, the Walker summons Lord of the Pit. Garth, quote, hurls it back upon the demonic hordes, destroying them, the Lord roaring with delight as it devours creatures. So, the Lord of the Pit ate creatures of its caster per its effect. The assumption can be made that Garth stopped its attack somehow, and the Lord of the Pit's effect destroyed the demonic hordes that Kuthemon had summoned. He's used fog before. Could be like darkness, it could be holy day, like it could be festival, the spell festival. Let's just assume it's fog and move forward. A dark force of nature was next brought to tear the demon apart. Well, the demonic hordes have already been killed, so the only demon left on the field would be Lord of the Pit. We're gonna assume Garth cast Force of Nature, the creature, the 8/8, right? Lord of the Pit's a 7/7. Now, normally Force of Nature couldn't block the Lord of the Pit, but reversely, Lord of the Pit could block and die to the Force of Nature. So one of 2 things happened. Garth attacked with Force of Nature and Kuthemon blocked with the Lord of the Pit to avoid damage, or Arena, the land, is in play, and the only creatures on the field for its target were Force of Nature and Lord of the Pit. Regardless, bare minimum, Garth cast Force of Nature. It then goes on to describe that dragons fought in the sky, implying multiple dragons fighting. The only dragons in the game up to this point are Dragonwhelp, Shivan Dragon, Elder Landworm, which can't fly, and then the Elder Dragons, like Chromium, Nicol-Bolas, etc. Now, no Elder Dragons are named in Arena, plus there's no way a simple fighter... Remember, fighter is the book's term for a magic user, not like sword and board. Like, Garth could summon and control an Elder Dragon. That's not likely. The Elder Dragons took a lot of effort to summon in the rest of the novels, so we're gonna just ignore those. We're gonna assume that Garth can cast Shivan Dragon and Dragonwhelp. Now, to be fair, he's probably not casting Dragonwhelp right now, even if he has the spell at his disposal. He's fighting for his life, but has demonstrated concern for his creatures when he can, and is unlikely to sacrifice a young dragon like that. So we're gonna safely say Garth can cast Shivan Dragon, if not more than one, but we're just gonna give him a copy and move forward. Doppelgangers stalked each other is the next line. That's easy. Vesuvan Doppelganger. They're doppelgangers in name, they have doppelgangery effects. It could be clone, but we're gonna give him Vesuvan Doppelganger. Hydras battled atop the wall. In 1994, the only Hydra printed up to this point was Rock Hydra, and that's a red spell. But, like, sure, Garth can cast Rock Hydra. He's got a copy somewhere. And then the last sentence of this paragraph, this cluster of spells being cast back and forth is, and Jinn struggled on the ground between the 2 fighters. As the Jinn are fighting on the ground, that rules out, like, all of the blue Jinn. I'm sorry, Mahatma Jinn, you're still cool. Like, 5/6 flying for 6. Pretty nice. But, being as the fighting's on the ground, that means it could be Mijak Jinn, it could be Urnam Jinn, or Juzum Jinn. or some combination, but due to Garth's affinity to green and blue mana, it's safe to assume he's casting Arnhem Gem. A rank of bodyguards to take a hit for him is the next thing he casts, which, wouldn't you know, there's a card called Veteran Bodyguard that can take hits for you. Neat. And then, this final spell Garth casts in the novel is a spell that Garth uses to turn damage back on his opponent. There's multiple possibilities. I strongly think it's Reverberation. It's blue, it redirects spell damage, it's the kind of sneaky spell not many have heard of that Garth would be likely to employ to finish his most hated foe. I'm also very partial to Reverberation and include it in my own Garth Commander deck, because no one expects their damage to be returned to them. It's also a cute way to deal with someone trying to use a Blasphemous Act. They cast Blasphemous Act, you cast Reverberation, and if there's like 4 things on board, they die to the damage. It's neat. That being said, it could also be Eye for an Eye, as Garth takes the damage and deals an equal amount right back to Kuthamon, as opposed to ignoring the damage and sending it back. Now that I say it, it's more likely to be Eye for an Eye. But I prefer Reverberation, so we're going to give him Reverberation and move on. He then steals the Spark from Kuthamon, which, D-Spark is a spell that was printed later. But we're just going to call this a cool moment and ignore that. And then in chapter 16, no spells are cast, and all that remains is a future yet to be decided. And, yeah, we're going to call it good there. That's all the spells he's got at his little fingertips. I compiled all of this in a Moxfield list. Yes, it doesn't have any land in it, as we can't really tell the exact land breakdown of Garth's deck, but 4 of each duel and we're good. It's fine. Though he does use 66 unique spells and 3 artifacts, he's got a fairly bloated deck by the end of it. Though that being said, just because he claimed spells from that guy casting red and black doesn't mean he just shoved that guy's deck into his deck and called it good. His spell satchel is certainly full to bursting by the end of his adventure. He's probably going to have to take some time and parse down his collection back into a playable deck. But yeah, that's all the spells I could find for Garth One Eye using in Arena. We're going to ignore Book 2 in the Greensleeves trilogy because they assassinate his character something fierce, and we're just gonna ignore that. Garth's an asshole in that book, and it's bad. Who leads with a copy of Lich? Who casts Lich as their first spell in a fight? Whatever. I hope this was entertaining. Do the thing, Okay.